Yeah. I'm looking at like a year plus of just focusing on the kinds of content that I want to make, for one, and not getting distracted with stuff that I really don't want to be doing. Connecting my music back to the other things that I'm passionate about, I think is really important to me. The last 4 years just of life have kind of like opened up my eyes to a lot of things in the world that I, realize I care about more than I probably thought I did when I was younger. Right. And I want that to be a part of, how I connect with people through my music.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am one of your hosts, Corrin Campbell, and with me is my co-host, Jack McCarthy. What's up, Jack? How are you this week?
Oh, I am doing just fine. So stoked to be here. How are you?
Dude, I'm all right. It's spring.
It is.
So that means two things in Tennessee. Beautiful weather for like 6 days, and then tornadoes and flooding for the 7th.
April showers bring May flowers is how the saying goes.
Yeah, well, we already have flowers here, but it's also, we got a lot of other stuff going on too.
Yeah, I heard about the floods, and there's tornadoes down south. Shit is wild right now.
Yeah, that's spring in the South, man. So, but we're not here today to talk about the weather. Today, we're doing the next iteration of our Back to Basics series. And I'm actually really stoked for this one because today we're going to be talking about what would we do if we were starting from scratch, starting over. And this was Jack's idea. I'll give him all the credit.
Why, thank you.
Jack,
thank you very much.
What inspired you to have us go with this topic today?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I, for one, just thought that this was a fun topic, but what inspired it for me was we see a lot of indies in our community that are really just kind of getting their feet wet with their marketing for the very first time. And this is people who, maybe they've got a new project that they're launching or a new band. Oftentimes it's people though that, they've had, a few years under their belt, sometimes more than that, sometimes a decade or more. And they've been doing, they've been fighting their way through the good fight of getting their music out there and playing shows and touring and recording. But in a lot of cases, like the digital marketing side of it is new. It's new, beyond like trying to wade through posting on social media and understanding it, really trying to have a dedicated strategy is a new thing. And so a lot of questions that we get from people all over that spectrum of like, total newbie and just getting into things for the first time to I've been doing things and just didn't really know how to tackle this part of it. One of the big questions is like, where do I start if I'm starting from scratch? Or where do I start if I'm, totally starting fresh? And so I thought that it would be a cool question for us to ask ourselves. And I'm really excited to talk about it too, because I'm actually in this place myself with my own music. So I'm excited to just share some of the things that have been rattling around in my brain and the personal struggles that I've been having with it, and kick them around together and let everybody in on the world.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I also want to just address something quickly, because we see a lot of indies in the Indie Pro group, and in the regular indies group as well, who feel tempted to start a new ad account or start a new page. They're like, oh, I've been running to these countries. Should I start over? And I would recommend not doing that. Just because we're talking about starting from scratch here does not necessarily mean that you're like, okay, well, I'll just go back to square one. Through my job that I did in the military for 6 years, I was on tour. I got millions of impressions. I, had 250,000 copies of my album distributed, all for free. And there was a whole lot there that I thought was going to give me a lot of great exposure. And so I thought when I got out, I'm just going to be able to ride that wave and get my music career going in the commercial sense again. And it didn't work out that way. It really was completely starting over. The job that I did just didn't give me traction. Now, it does make me Googleable now, which I think has given me an advantage, as far as building that audience back up at a rapid rate.
Yeah.
But in reality, I lost all the audience that I had prior to that, which was, tens of thousands of customers and a lot of people who followed my career very closely in the MySpace days, and MySpace died. So, that didn't help.
Yeah.
I think that there's always a temptation to start over. And I actually did that. I got out of the military and I decided to, I didn't want it to be under my name because my name had been used with all this other stuff. And I wanted a clean slate. And so I started a new band name and repackaged my music and had a new Facebook page, started totally over. And that didn't work very well. So even though I did a lot of great things, at that point, because I was smarter than I was when I first started under my solo name, it wasn't worth starting over in that way. Instead, I started over in a mindset, and so when we talk about this stuff today, I just want to encourage you, if you feel like, I have all these things, but I'm kind of starting over, or my music has shifted genre, or my branding is different, I would just encourage you to not think that you have to start from scratch in all things. Just start now, just like if you're trying to develop a new habit or trying to quit a bad habit, it's not about erasing what happened behind you. It's about, okay, starting today. It's this. This is my new way of functioning. So I just wanted to put that out there right at the beginning because I don't want anyone to think that, there's any reason to erase your history. It's all part of a story of who you are as an artist. So just embrace that, but know that starting today, it's this, and you can pivot to that anytime you want. Now, if you have no history, lucky you, you're starting from scratch. You can do everything perfectly the first time, but wait, we don't do anything perfectly. So it's not gonna behoove you to, try to do everything perfect right off the get. But there are a lot of things that, I have learned and that Jack has learned as well at the agency that have helped us inform how we'd recommend starting things off, just based on what we've seen. So, Jack, you have a ton of exposure to grassroots artists, some of whom have a small audience, and you've even worked with some who have pretty much no one. So why don't you kind of start guiding this train?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll start with personal backstory here, like what I would do if I was starting from scratch, or maybe better put right now, like what I am doing because I'm starting from scratch. So a little bit of context, just backstory on where my music career is and where it has been and kind of what led me to this point. I was in bands all throughout, high school, my teenage years, college, in a number of different bands. After college, I started creating solo music and had gone on tour actually as a touring guitarist with a band that I wasn't, an official member of. I was a hired gun touring guitar player, and also spent time on the road with some of my other friends' bands, doing, kind of miscellaneous tech-related things for them. And through the process of doing that sort of touring work, kind of built up a little fan base of my own for the solo music that I was creating under the name Noisy Soul. And I put out an EP in 2017, and I think it has like 5 or 6 songs on it. And I put out a single, made a whole bunch of content, was putting out, regular covers on YouTube, doing a lot of content on Instagram. I also had a following that had built up on Twitter, not a massive fan base to any degree. But that was where a lot of my fans were hanging out at the time. And really, I hit a massive creative block, and I don't use this as an excuse at all, but I hit a massive creative block basically right after I released an EP in 2017, and had a whole bunch of personal stuff going on in life as well, that kind of stalled me or got me to a place where I, sort of felt a little bit of an identity crisis in myself as like the sound that I was going after and the artist that I was trying to be and the music that I was making, to the point that I really creatively was blocked and have been blocked for quite a while. I've still been writing, but it's been at a far less frequency or a far lower frequency than I've ever had in my whole entire life. And I filled a lot of that space with helping other artists grow and running a business. And that's taken up, most of my mental bandwidth, my emotional bandwidth, and kind of leads me to where I am today, having put, most of my own music on the back burner. I was producing bands, like I said. I was working with artists, obviously, here at Indepreneur and growing the company, doing some other business-related things as well. And, trying to maintain a sense of a social life and and everything else that goes with being a human being.
Right.
But all that said, I've got a ton of stuff that I've, kind of a ton of life things that I want to put into music. And I'm kind of now in this place of really feeling that burning urge to get into the studio and create and make music again. And so I'm starting fresh, really, like totally fresh. I'm still not even sure how I'm pulling myself out of this sort of sonic identity crisis of like, what do I want this to sound like? Or, where is my music taking me sonically from like a style perspective? I'm still figuring that out. And it's been hard and really weird. But in terms of, where that puts me in terms of how I'm starting out is like right now, my priority is one, like just getting back into the habit of writing music again. So like that was the first thing that I wanted to touch on here, like in terms of like what I should do because I'm starting over is getting back into the habits that I used to be, so endeared to and have so ingrained in me, especially like in my teenage years and my 20s, my early 20s, was, I had a very routine habit of like when I would write lyrics and how I would write songs. Bringing myself back to that is kind of like task number one for me, is like getting back in the routine. And if that involves time blocking, which it probably will, in order to fit in with how my life functions now as a professional, that's going to be part of it. So that's kind of like step number one for me, is getting back in the routine of like the creative routine, really, and not allowing it to just slip away to the side because something else is taking priority over it. So allowing creativity and music to become a priority for me is kind of like my first step into restarting. And not, I imagine that not everybody will resonate with that. There's probably plenty of people listening. I know plenty of indies who don't have that kind of creative block happen. They feel like music is just something that they can do. And, I think for a long time, I probably felt that way too. But in the past few years, I've really slipped into this pattern of like just being stuck. And instead of unstucking myself, I just filled that time and that mental energy with other things that were also really productive, like amazing things. But, like that, there's that unfulfilled space in me that I'm trying to get back to. So that's kind of like point number one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And it's so funny because once you get unstuck, all right, you're going to be really good at marketing your shit. You know what I mean? So. Like, yeah, like you're going to know how to do this because you've been doing it for so many artists. So, and I think it kind of speaks to the different things that we all struggle with, right? Which is that, and we talk about this on every episode practically, where it's like, I have to do all these things, and it's kind of like Randy was saying last week in his episode, is like, look, you don't have to be a master of all things.
Yeah.
And, trying to become that is very, very difficult. But you should try, make sure that you're trying to fill holes, and if you're an independent artist, there's a lot of holes, It doesn't mean that you need to be an expert in things, but it does mean that you may get stuck in things that aren't your forte, or
Yeah.
aren't something you've done in a while. Maybe you're out of practice or whatever it is, or maybe you just have a mental block. I hit those all the time where I'm like, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I don't wanna.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of things that can cause you to get stuck, and you can get stuck anywhere, or you're too busy or whatever, there's just so many causes, and then there's so many different channels of this. So even if someone isn't necessarily stuck in the music, which I know there are people who are, I know I go through that on a recurring basis. There's also people who get stuck in, the ad part, or there's people who get stuck in Spotify, or there's people who get stuck in, sales, right? There's so many different things where you can get stuck. And I guess the point is that you just gotta figure out how to either, get unstuck mentally or develop a skill or, figure out how to get through it,
Yeah.
and that can be very challenging when you're first starting out at any one of these categories because it's a hill,
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest, that's the creative side, and actually making the music is really the place that I'm the most, that I need the most work in terms of my restart mode. Because here's, and this is kind of getting into the stuff that I feel more confident about, or at least have a very clear path to what I'm planning on doing for myself and what I would recommend for anyone else who's in a position similar to mine, where, they're either launching a new project or revamping, their solo career, or kicking off a new band, or, maybe reuniting with a band. It could be anything. I think, for me right now, with the audience that I have, which is really next to nothing at this point, which is fine. That's something that I'm just aware of, I know what my ecosystem looks like. I don't have a list. I think I have a list of 100 people, so nothing massive. Retargeting audiences at this point are gone, which is all good. But I'm in a place where, action steps once music is being creative for me looks like mostly awareness building, really working the first few steps of the buddy system. And I plan on hanging out there for a while. I'm looking at a year plus of just focusing on the kinds of content that I want to make, for one, and not getting distracted with stuff that I really don't want to be doing. Connecting my music back to the other things that I'm passionate about, I think is really important to me. The last 4 years just of life have kind of opened up my eyes to a lot of things in the world that I, realize I care about more than I probably thought I did when I was younger. And I want that to be a part of, how I connect with people through my music. So coming up with the types of recurring content that I want to, kind of build into my topic wheel. That's one thing that I'm sort of looking towards. But also more in a more concrete way, my first step is identifying what kind of fan finder I want to be running, and starting to create video content around that. And, hopefully having the help from a team, friends. I have tons of creative people in my corner, who I can lean on either for just ideation, or if I need to call in a favor or some help, and, bring on a videographer friend for a project. I can do that kind of thing, which is great, because I haven't always been in that position to be able to do that. Either the people weren't around, or I wasn't financially in a place where it made sense to do that. But right now, from a goals perspective, it's just investment time in terms of building the assets that need to be built for that awareness generation. So that's what I'm looking towards, is okay, once I've got some music that I'm feeling really good about, and I'm probably going to pull some music from my back catalog too. What kind of video, what kind of front end video do I want to be leading with? Or, front end videos, plural, is really where I'm at. What kind of content do I want to be creating? What is it going to look like? And I'm just going to make that and start testing it. And I'm going to live in top of funnel intro stage work, like I said, for a while. So that's really my next step,
Right.
is putting together a badass fan finder and just focusing there. I'm not thinking a lick about ROI, not even in the slightest.
Right.
I do have some ideas in the back of my mind for opt-in offer bribes, permission stage bribes, just to have that kind of hanging around. But I'm not really putting a whole lot of effort or emphasis on it right now. It's not something that like I'm critically concerned about. It's more just going to be like, of the cool things that I'm going to create, what kinds of things do I want to put behind, an email wall just to get people over to the next step with me, and if they're ready to go there. So those are kind of like the things that are on my brain right now. And now I'm in a place where it's like, okay, step by step, how am I going to figure out how to do this, and what's the timeline going to look like? For me, I'm going into, we're going into summertime soon, which historically is always a good time creatively for me. So I know I'm getting into that season, which is really exciting. I'm super pumped about it. So I'm just looking to be like, okay, let me capitalize on a time where I know I've historically been at a creative high, and not distract myself with too much pressure on like, you have to have a fan finder done by June. Right now, it's just like the main thing you need to do, Jack, is focus on making the music, creating it, feeling good about it. And then from there, starting to dive into, what's your next step in terms of content? Okay, let's block that out week by week, month by month, and start building, the assets that you need. And then as far as like the marketing side of things, like I'll build a fan finder in a week tops, a few fan finders in a week tops. I'm being super conservative with the time estimates there, because I do these all the time. That's no issue. That's no issue. But I am looking forward to that kind of as like the event on the horizon. That's kind of the culmination of a lot of the work that I'm putting in on the creative front end. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting too, because Circa's going through this as well. He was a battle rapper for a long time, and then kind of took a break and started Entrepreneur, and has been focusing a lot of energy on that. And then last year he started being like, all right, I first off don't want to do battle rapping anymore. And, want to start doing this music thing again, and really concentrating his time in developing that. And something he's been focusing on a lot is just acquiring attention, right? Yeah. And making sure that people know who he is, so that if he, and it's the same thing, like even when we talk about running advertising and then going to an opt-in campaign, for example, we say all the time, like our album launch strategy or our launch strategy in Indie Pro is, it's hard to get people to do all of it in one fell swoop. Especially if you don't have a large enough audience. You need a large audience for that to work, because the conversion rate is going to bring that number of people down fast,
Yeah. Yep.
So if you can garner attention and get the first little, nucleus of fan base there, it gives you data, it gives your ad account data. You can make judgments based on, how people are interacting with your stuff, what they like, don't like. And you can test out a lot of things early on. Not to say that you should be changing your music or, changing anything about you as an artist in that fashion. Just that you have information to make smart marketing decisions, in identifying who fans of this sound are, Yeah. That way you can kind of customize what happens when you do start marketing it more heavily. Is like, I know these people, I know what they like, I've seen what they like from me, so now I can provide more of that, and your conversion rate will be higher because you have that understanding.
Yeah, totally. And I think that that's like particularly really great advice for me. Like it's really critical, I think, at this stage, because I'm kind of rediscovering, like, for myself, what I want this whole project to be about, and how much I want to lean into like who I am as a human, and how much of that I really want to put out there, or maybe not how much of it, but like what specifically I want to put out there, and why that matters to me, and why that might matter to other people, and finding out who it does and who it doesn't. I guess, like, in marketing speak, like who gives a shit and who doesn't,
Right.
That's really what I want to spend my time figuring out. And I think in doing that, like I'm going to be in a place where like the creation of music is just, that passion is kind of rekindled for me. Which is really like that fire will just kind of drive the rest of it. So I'm really excited about it. But yeah, vulnerability, even talking about it, because it's hard to express. It's been something that's been rattling around in my brain for the better part of a year and a half now. And just putting one foot in front of the other to get started has been really challenging. So all the tough love that I sometimes give to indies about like just doing stuff, like believe me, I'm putting it on myself more than I'm saying here.
Right. You're like, me too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I get that too. Like I hit that. I've been making music for 12 years now. I've been selling albums for 12 years and touring and had, ups and downs in fan base and in just my general activity. And, even over the last year, I did that greatest hits album or albums, I did the dual disc and it was completely different from the rest of my music. And a lot of people discovered me through that process. And it's like, well, you're never going to hear me do anything like that again. And so that's kind of an awkward conversation, and I realized that marketing the greatest hits album beyond the people who loved the originals in rock was kind of a short-term thing, because they're not going to stick around, and so that was a tough lesson for me to learn because otherwise, I put out an EP in 2018 that was, my standard rock sound. And before that, I hadn't released anything since 2013. So there's a lot of pressure on me right now with, all of the fans that I've generated because I really concentrated on it over the last few years since I got out of the military. And there's a lot of pressure to create a really fucking awesome rock album. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's been, 2018 was not even that soon ago. Like it was a while ago for as far as how people are used to music being released, Yeah. So, and I've learned a lot about marketing and myself and my fans and whatever. So, that's another point that I'm going to kind of center in on when I'm like, you don't like just erase what you did, like this album, I'm going to try some singles and, I'm going to try other things. And, try if the world opens back up, touring it when I first release it, which is a new concept, that I've not applied to myself. So,
that's a really good point. Like talking about not erasing what you did, it's definitely a spot that I've been thinking about a lot personally as well. Is like, I've got, back catalogs of music from bands that I've been in, and mostly it's bands that I've fronted as a singer for going back decades now. And, when I started doing solo music, I kind of left all of that to the side as if it was something that didn't matter or wasn't relevant and, just really kind of just left it. But I'm really going into this new sort of era of being an artist, and I'm kind of looking at all of that as like that's part of the story, and I sort of want to showcase it. Also like I need to get the thumbs up on some of that and how I do it with the people that I was in bands with. Which introduces a whole nother thing. Luckily.
Or you could be like me and just go unhinged, because I definitely did that. I just ripped the Army a new one, and not totally, but like I just was like, I'm gonna talk about this. It's a little different.
Yeah, thankfully I'm not going up against the Army.
Yeah, right. Which means I'm at higher risk. Maybe not a good choice, but yeah, totally. I think it's, figuring out what portion of your story, first off, is relatable, right? And secondly, like what, how far do you go before it's like, okay, we get it, dramatic, like there's a point where divulging and being that vulnerable is just unnecessary, right?
Yeah, especially for people who are just getting to know you, that's definitely the line that you toe when starting over. It's like, new people are coming into your world. Do they want to hear your dramatic sob story? And No,
Right.
they probably don't. They just want to jam out to your music and get to know you a little bit better. They're not ready for hand to waist yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've all had new people come into our lives like that, right? Especially like if alcohol is involved or, where it's like, whoa, too much information, and not just in inappropriate ways, like if they're talking about their sex life or whatever, but just like if they're talking about their life and something really heavy comes into play, it's kind of like, yo, we just met, like, relax, man.
Yeah.
So you never want to put someone in that position when you're just starting to get to know them, which is why, sometimes you lock that stuff behind a gateway. Like, I talk about the Army in a more vulnerable, honest way in the Gilded Experience, and I draw it, very specifically to the songs that were inspired by that situation, or, experience I've had with other bands or whatever. Like there's a lot of songs that are written about those life experiences, but it's definitely after they've already shown interest. Like this is on the 4th and 5th day of my Gilded Experience.
Yeah.
And if they're still showing up after day 4 or 5, like they've earned it at that point and they're ready for it. But I definitely wouldn't open with it.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that we've kind of identified is that starting over can really apply to a lot of things, and it's not necessarily you're starting from scratch in that you've never done anything. It might be that you're starting from scratch in where you are in your career right now. Or maybe it's just, you do a hard reset when you do a new album or new set of singles, right? Or when you do a brand shift. There's a lot of ways that you can be starting from scratch. And pretty much it's, I'll probably start from scratch in a way every time I put out new stuff. If I change my brand colors, like my brand colors were purple for the longest time. My hair is purple. My website's purple, and as these new songs start rolling out, it'll change. So I'm starting from scratch on a much smaller scale in some other areas, So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of inspo to be taken here, even if you're not just getting your music feedback under you,
Yeah, totally. I mean, something you brought up when we kicked off the episode was like, what is it, what are you starting over? And you mentioned it here too, like what does starting over really mean? Or what does starting from scratch really mean? Something that I've fought with myself on, and I imagine a lot of indies go through this, is like, especially when going through a change in sound or style or a brand revamp, is like, does my artist name fit? Like, do I want to go under a different moniker?
Yeah.
Do I need a whole new band? And to be honest, like I definitely have struggled with that more than enough in the past that right now I'm kind of just relinquishing it and saying like, that doesn't matter right now. Like, I'm going to just stick with what I have because anything else, like worrying about it anymore, is just a waste of time, distracting me from the things that I actually need to be focusing on. So I think that's another thing when starting over. It's kind of important to identify like, what are the things that I'm starting over on and why, and what trajectory are they going to take me on if I put my efforts into them? Because for me, like, I could say like, I could sit here and be like, okay, I'm not going to go under the artist name Noisy Soul anymore. Like I'm going to come up with a new band name, or I'm going to start going under my, my actual name. But for me, that's a waste of time. Like it's totally a waste of mental energy. Like it really doesn't have a big impact on me from a brand perspective. The style is largely has been fluid anyway, since I kicked off the project 4 years ago. So it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I mean, if I could make an encouraging point to anybody who's wrestling with that, like try to determine if that's even something worth looking at, or if it's just, a distraction for you. It's not a shiny object. I get on about those all the time. This is not a shiny object, changing your band name, but it definitely can be a distraction if you've got other things that you need to really be putting your heart into.
Totally. I mean, and it kind of depends on who you are as an artist too, right? Like if you are someone who is inspired by word association, like maybe your name is what breeds all of the music that you create. Maybe that's an inspiration point for you. Or maybe you're the other way around, where you're like, no, I just want to create music and then decide what to name my child. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that is something that, it totally depends based on who you are. But that's kind of the point, right? Is that there's no one way to do it. For example, I've already named my next album. I don't have a single song recorded for that album yet. And there are some songs that aren't even fully written and titled and whatever. Like, I already know what's inspiring the writing that's happening on that album. So I've already named it.
We're really alike in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I've already named it. My fans already know what it's titled. It's already a hashtag that they're using. You know what I mean? Like, this is a very, very early campaign, and I gave it a name, and I feel really great about it. And it's in my mind as I'm writing, in my mind as I'm recording, but sometimes your brain may not work that way. So I think that's something to figure out. So whether you're naming your band or your album or, your opt-in experience, if you're doing that or whatever, like, you have to decide whether a title inspires you to create stuff or whether you create stuff and then create a name for it, It's just like people who have kids, I guess, some of them name their kid months before, like, they have names picked out, but like by the time they hit that 12-week mark, they're like, this girl is going to be Sally. You know what I mean? And and they have their name all over the walls and they do all of that. Right. And then there's some people that are like, I'm going to wait until this kid comes out and see what they look like. And I've got this short list of names and, so that's really, I think it's kind of the same thing. It really just depends on what inspires you.
Yeah, totally. There's another element that I wanted to touch on here before I let it get away from me is like, I'm coming from a place where, like, I don't have retargeting audiences to work with. I don't have a massive fan base that's been, really communicating with me all that much, from either what I was doing before or a previous band or anything like that. So I'm starting from scratch on the audience perspective as well. However, I want to make the point that, like, if you find yourself starting from scratch and you're coming from a place where you do have an audience, I would encourage you to not just abandon those people that have been along the journey with you so far. This is kind of going back to what we were saying about, not neglecting or casting to the side, what you've done previously. That includes your people, like, right. In a lot of ways, like, the people that have connected with your music, whether it be a totally different project, maybe your band broke up or something like that, or you decided to take on, or you went from a solo project into a band. I think working to take those people along with you into the new thing, for a lot of people, that's a part of starting over, is like, how do I make sure that the people who are, starting over with me are given a cool experience of coming along. And I think that's an important part for, I think, a lot of people to keep in mind. That's not relevant to me at all. But if I was in a place like that where I was finding myself starting over and I knew, like, there's people who've connected with my music and they care and they want to be in the loop. Well, the first thing that I would be making sure to do from an audience perspective might not be top of funnel awareness. Sure, that would be in the mix, but I would also be making sure to, keep in touch with the people who are already there, and make sure that they're, taken care of.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's something that, it's so, when there's shift in personnel or shift in style, like,
it's so hard.
It's really difficult. And I think just being kind of open and honest with people takes care of that. I mean, a maybe known or not known fact about me is that I'm divorced, and I was married to basically the other half of the creation process. So he basically mixed and mastered back in the day, until we hired people to do it. But he was the drummer and he liked to play guitar on the record. We also had professional guitarists play, but and he was kind of this other half, and I wrote the songs and I sang. and, played bass and wrote some of the riffs, and he wrote some of the riffs. And so it was a very collaborative kind of situation. And, we were the two faces of this, this act that everyone recognized. And then the rest of the people in the band kind of rotated in and out. And it was just assumed that there was like this for hire situation with them.
Yeah.
So we went through a really cruddy breakup, and he peaced out. Obviously, we weren't going to keep making music together at that point. So, there was an explanation that I owed to my people, and even when I was playing in the military stuff, like, the guys that were in my band, Pete and Steve, like people loved them, and I had to explain when I left the military, like, look, these guys aren't leaving the military. They can't come with me, and it's a bummer, but that's just how it works, because we're military. And so I found that people were really understanding when I was just like, look, no bullshit. This is just what it is. And that's why you see a lot of bands put out statements when they have members move. I find that artists generally don't make statements about like, hey, we're moving in a direction that's different sonically. I don't think that's necessarily something that a lot of artists do. They don't apologize for it. They're like, yeah, we are people and we evolve. But, it's almost something that I wish more artists would address. Be like, look, this is going to sound different, but it's who we are. And, if you love us, you'll love it, So I kind of wish that more artists did do that, not in an apologetic way at all, but just to be like, come with us on this journey,
What's
the next adventure,
what's fascinating about that, and I've never thought about it in this light before, but where you see artists do that is never in like, it's not usually in relationship with the fans. Like it's usually in like, an interview in a magazine where they're talking about like, oh, our new record is XYZ compared to our previous record, which was ABC,
Right,
like
right.
you've seen, I've seen it especially in a lot of bands that I grew up listening to. Like if they took a turn for like a darker record, that was, a highlighting point of when the album came out, that they would have interviews that would be like, yeah, like we, just for example's sake, like we became parents. So like the world took on like, a scarier sensation. So that came out in our records, but it's very rarely, I don't want to say never. It's very rare that you hear it in like the context of like, we're addressing you, singular you, the fan that loves us. We're addressing you to let you know what this is all about, why it sounds different, and why we want you to care about it and stick with us.
Right.
I think, if you're in a place where it's, whether you're starting over or it is just a shift in sound, like I'm not saying you owe it to your fans, but I am saying that you do yourself and the fans a service when you have that open dialogue with them, because that's not a normal thing. And it could be really cool.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like, I don't know. If you're in, for example, for me, a good relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship or whatever it is, it's that even when you have challenges, you're going through an adventure together, And the more that artists look at their fans as a family that's going through whatever adventure together, I think the more that the fans really respond to that kind of conversation, because they're like, we're together in this, we're going through it, So anyway, we're getting a little heavy here, but I think I knew
this was gonna be an emotional, vulnerable one.
Here we go. But I think, it's definitely, so, all right, let's, we've got some time here at the end of the episode. Let's talk about logistics. All right. We've talked about a lot of the, the mental health and the, just the battles in the beginning of starting from scratch or starting over, right? So to speak, in some way. So let's talk about logistics for a second. Like we're talking about budget, we're talking about campaigns, we're talking about, those marketing things. So and I know you kind of touched on this already, Jack, like you're going into getting new people to pay attention to what you're doing, because what you're doing is new. So where else are we looking at focus for? Let's take an example of a couple of artists who might be at different places. So say if someone's like totally grassroots like you, we've kind of determined what you would recommend for that. What are a couple of other tiers that may be going through this, like, starting over or starting a new chapter, and, what you see as things that they can do with their budget and their marketing efforts?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So just a couple ideas logistically, and this is probably like underscoring anything you do from a marketing perspective is just like get your ducks in a row, like organization wise. So, whether you like to work in a project management tool like Asana or Trello, or whether you like to keep things, in a calendar or a notebook or whatever, just make sure you've got a process that you like to follow for organizing your ideas and your initiatives and your projects. I think that's kind of like step number one. At least it is for me. And I feel like that's appropriate for anybody at any level of, where their fan base is at and where they are. Like you should be organized before you try to get into this. Cause otherwise you're going to spin your wheels trying to do all the things and not really have like a format, or like a rhyme or reason to why you're doing things when you're doing them. So that's like logistic point number one. I like Asana a lot for like marketing related builds or projects. I like notebooks for creative related things. So those would probably be like my two primary places that I would live or will live. Now that I'm putting it into the universe.
Yeah, say it in the present, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that would be my two. But I mean, it could vary for everybody. So I would start there. But then in terms of like your marketing stuff, one, like I said, like looking at your fan base and really getting an idea of like what you're working with. From an audience perspective, we talk about this plenty on the podcast of like knowing what your ecosystem looks like. But I think that that's probably like logistic point number two. Once you've got like your structure, you should know what your infrastructure in terms of audience looks like. You're likely starting out with a marketing infrastructure, campaigns and stuff. You're probably starting totally fresh from that, but you might not be starting fresh with, with the audiences you're working with. You might have a list, or, an old projects list or something like that. So kind of taking stock of what all of those people related assets or those relationship related assets look like. I think that's like point number two.
Yeah.
And then just determining like, what's going to happen? Are you planning on releasing singles? Are you planning on dropping a project like an album or an EP? I think having a sense of what that plan is going to be, or at least a general idea, then you can start to outline. And we've talked about this on like, on the episode where we talked about like back planning your music marketing success. I'll link to that in the show notes too. Cause I didn't think of it till just now, when you mentioned like, the different types of artists that this could apply to, but, sort of back planning based on what your goals are. I think that that's, helpful for building marketing campaigns. So you might say like, okay, I know that I've got an email list of people who maybe haven't heard from me in a while. Maybe they have, maybe they're not used to hearing from you alone. But if you have that, then you should determine like, okay, how am I going to attack that angle? What am I going to do for those people? That would be kind of like one place that I would look towards. And not spend too much time getting wrapped up in like having a perfect plan. I think that's something that I want to underscore here, because I know that I'm super overwhelmed at all of this idea. All of these ideas, they can be really overwhelming, especially if you don't know, like, I don't know if I'm going to put out an album. I don't know if I'm going to just put out singles. Well, then you can't perfectly craft what you're going to do for everybody, in your buddy system, but you could at least start jotting down some ideas, and back planning based on, maybe some of the loose, cool things that you want to do. So I don't know if that perfectly answers the logistics question from my perspective, but at least that's some of the stuff that comes to mind.
Yeah, when I started back over after I came out of the Army, I put out an EP first so that I can kind of get a vibe for what people were into. And there were some differences between the songs on the album. There were some variables in the mix, some variables in kind of the vibe, right? There's one tune that is very positive and like, go you, and there's a lot of really angry shit like there always is on my albums. And I was, and none of that was like inauthentic, but I was trying it out. I was like, okay, what are people responding to? And it's funny because, a lot of gamers really responded to the one that was like, go you, which was funny because they were like, oh yeah, this sounds like an RYBY kind of intro or the intro to a game, you know what I mean? And then there were other ones that attracted different kinds of people. So from there, I was able to kind of determine like, okay, nobody, I guess there wasn't a resounding like, well, this sounds weird kind of situation from the fans I already had. And then new fans are always going to be a mixed bag. But I found my people who really liked that. So it was easier to start with an EP. If I were starting completely over, I think I would start with a couple of singles and running fan finders on them and figuring out, what works, just getting used to seeing what new people coming in look like. I think singles are easy. They're low commitment. It's completely within the expectation of what people are interested in now. I wouldn't necessarily think this was the best solution for people who already have a catalog because people will pay you for an album. They're not really going to pay you for a single unless you do something really cool with vinyl and it also has some like, B-side stuff on it or something like that. But that's complex. Largely, you might want to go with an EP at that point or have some singles come out in front of an album, which is what I'm going to be doing. But I think I've really shifted my thinking about singles, especially for brand new artists, because it does give you that idea of who's interested and, where you want to go and you kind of, dip your toes in. I think, though, the understanding needs to be that there's probably not going to be a crap ton of ROI on that single unless you are lucky enough to hit like a Spotify editorial playlist or something like that,
I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where you just kind of have to know like this is going to be a loss and that's okay because I'm learning about, how to market this and who my people are and whatever. But I think you kind of climb up that whole thing. And, I also released a single kind of midway that was a collab and it was a little bit different. And then I released remixes and then I did my greatest hits album. And so I was able to kind of throw a lot of stuff at the wall just for fun because it inspired me to create it because I already had a core base that cared about that, So I think that starting out, release less, to concentrate on making some really good songs and, making them the best that you can and marketing those, knowing that you're probably not going to profit from that. And once you gather that, you're probably ready for an EP and then you're probably ready for an album. And then maybe you can do whatever the flip you want because you've established this fan base by then. So yeah, I mean, if I were starting from scratch, I would do it that way.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, like that definitely resonates with me and is really like the path that I'm going with. But I do agree with you. I kind of think that applies maybe no matter how big your fan base might be, unless you're like a massive superstar or something. Like I think there's validity to, releasing a single or a string of singles, just to, essentially like have a focus group of cold traffic going. You could apply that same sort of testing methodology to people who are already in your world. Say you've got an email list, say you've got some, people in your warm audiences that you could get back in front of. You could, kind of squeak things out to them first before you go into like the single release phase. Not for the purposes of ROI, but for the purpose of just relationship building, or relationship retention. I think that's what I would probably focus on if I was in that position, is like, give the people something. Those people who have been around is what I mean by the people. I would I would start there. And then, I agree with you 100%. I think the length of time of like, how long you go in like single world and you sort of fish a little bit and test the waters with your new sound and your new brand or whatever it is. I think, the length of that could be, the variable of like, depending where you're at, depending what the size of your audience is like, you might do that for longer. If you're a grassroots artist like me, you would spend more time in that sort of testing phase where you're not going to be making money back. You're just purely investing in getting your music in front of people, feeling out what they dig and what they don't, and, starting the process of getting to know them. That would go longer for you if you're in a grassroots position, as opposed to if you've got some backing in terms of an audience coming off of the tails of something else. Right. That process might be truncated a little bit, and then you could, have a project, an EP planned at the end of it. That's the ending is a little bit, it comes up a little bit quicker. So maybe that's logistically what I would recommend, is like, if you're in a place where you do have an audience, then you could look ahead a little bit further and say like, okay, I know that I'm going to spend some time just getting this in front of people and, reinvigorating the people that are, in my world. But then I know that the end game for this phase of my, my refresh or my starting over is going to be an EP that does X, Y, Z. And maybe the goal isn't profit. Maybe the goal is just, give people some physical product, put together some merch. That could be the next step. You're testing the water of the sound and the style and the brand with singles, and maybe you're testing the water with merch development and physical product with an EP. And maybe the goal isn't to profit there. It's just to take you up to the next step. I think that's how I would probably look at it logistically.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, if you are in one of those unique situations where you have something go viral on TikTok, or or one of your IG reels blows up, maybe it's good to have some of the stuff in the backlog, right? I mean, I would say definitely don't stress yourself out over it. Like Jack's saying, he's like, I have ideas for permission bribes, for opt-in campaigns to get emails. But, that's not something that he's going to be stressing right away to like run campaigns to. However, having it available and having like a couple of really basic merchandise items available for those who just are like, yes, that can be good. Don't stress yourself out over it. But having it present and at least brainstorming on it so that if people are asking for it, you can give it to them. That's also kind of a good way to not feel overwhelmed. I find that creating the music and kind of jotting down ideas about merchandise or about artwork or about, whatever other things, conversation points, like, to me, it comes easy when I'm writing, and because I'm in the space. Me too. Yeah. So it's kind of like if that works for you, that might be something to do too, is while you're developing this music, like, think about the things that go with it. Now, if that doesn't work for you, don't stress yourself over it. But for me, it's easier to just kind of, play Sim City with the whole little world right there at the same time. It's still going to grow. I still have to wait for people to move into the commercial space. If there's any Sim City nerds out there, you know what I'm talking about. But that's something that can also help relieve some stress later if that's something that works for you.
Yeah, totally. I think that makes sense to underscore that point about like, have stuff in your backlog. I definitely plan to, even though, I'm not counting on a viral video or anything like that. Knowing that I've got some stuff in my back pocket that I could turn to if something were to happen, or if not, then I've got something to work with when I'm ready to go on that front. Actually, a really good example of this, from IndieX, from our clients, when our client, the Small Town Titans, went viral back in 2018, they went viral off of a fan finder video, and they immediately, and I've definitely talked about this on the podcast before, but they immediately ran a free plus shipping and handling offer to this mass of warm audience that was created off of their viral video. And they pulled that off in, a snap of a finger, because they knew that this was something that they could do. They were prepared to do it. They had the resources available to them, to learn how to build this kind of campaign. This was before they were working with us at IndieX. And they pulled that off, and it paid dividends for them. It really helped to take those people who were just discovering them for the first time and move them, a few steps into the buddy system, in short order. So the fact that they had that in their back pocket and were ready and willing to be agile, I think was really, really helpful. So I couldn't encourage that more. It's definitely something that's in the back of my mind. And I get excited just thinking about it, not from the standpoint of like, I'm going to go viral, but more so just like, I like having a bunch of creative marketing ideas in my back pocket, stuff that I could do. And I'm the same way.
Net.
And I'm the same way. It comes to me when I'm writing oftentimes, like I might be working on a song and it's like, it would be cool if I did XYZ about this, like, I don't know, I'm in the studio recording something and, I'm going to, take some Polaroid photos or something. It'd be cool if I did a giveaway for these. Jot that down. And, maybe that's a campaign you never use, but at least you've got an idea, and that idea might turn into another idea down the line. You might get 3 ideas from that one idea that, ends up being something totally different, but you're constantly churning out new things and sort of expanding that creativity, which is really why I love music marketing as much as I do. I've always felt like it was an extension of, my creativity as a songwriter and a producer. And so the fact that happens when I'm in, kind of creative mode, in terms of writing, I think that's, kind of just evidence of why I felt that way, and evidence to the fact that it's a thing. Well, and the best marketing
is always inspired by the art, right? Like it's way harder to write emails or, build products or whatever when you're just like when you're kind of doing it cold. Right. So it's always great to kind of, even if it's just in the back of your mind and you make a note and you build upon it later, that's the most authentic way to talk to people about stuff. So if you're starting from scratch or even just starting a new chapter, like take notes about how you feel while you're writing or while you're recording, or get content while you're doing those things. Maybe, don't post all of that to your socials, like keep some in a reserve so that you have it for later, whether it's an opt-in campaign or, just something that is kind of behind that content, or that contact gateway, right? If it's a text list, an email list, a, membership site, whatever it is, save some of that. Like don't waste it all on IG, like put some of it, on a hard drive somewhere and save it, because that kind of stuff is sometimes it's hard to fabricate, or to create later. So it's definitely something to keep in mind as you're going through a creation process.
Yeah, those in the moment ideas, don't let them pass you by.
Yeah, absolutely.
I sure won't.
Yeah, it's same. I'm in the process of it right now. Well, not this very second. I'm paying attention to you guys right now, but you know what I'm saying. So I guess that's it for this week's episode. I hope there was some inspo in there for you guys. We're going to be really excited to kind of dig back into some nerdy stuff next week, do some deep diving. So do we know what that is yet, Jack? Or are we still brainstorming? Or is it surprise?
Keeping it a secret for now.
Okay, it's a surprise. So you'll have to come back next week. But thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you then on Creative Juice.
East Coast, West Coast.